Trust in many forms of authority has been deeply eroding. In a 2016 survey, 55% of CEOs reported that they think a lack of trust is a threat to their organization's growth. But many leaders are not sure what to do about it. So what do you think is going on with trust in society today?
Well, we are on a trajectory. We've been on it for a while where trust has been damaged. Probably the past couple years, we've seen, both in our clients and in society in general, a further deterioration. And trust is one of those interesting elements. It's really basically the confidence that I believe somebody will live up to what they say. And yet society can't operate without it. Picture if you were to go into a supermarket and buy meat that has a label on it, you're trusting that that is accurate. You go into a gas station, you're trusting that the quality of the gas that you're putting in your car is accurate. You're not there watching them do all of that. Without trust, everything falls apart. And so we do live in this time where it's being eroded and damaged. Fortunately, though, I think there are things we can do to build trust, even in the midst of this cynical time that we're in. What are you all seeing in the work that you do with your teams and clients that is working in building trust?
I tend to link trust and connection very closely to one another. I cannot say, please trust me, absent that connection I have with you. So again, relationship becomes a key part of that. I think the struggle for organizations is there's often an expressed distrust between the lower level of the organization and the senior leadership. Sometimes there's 3 or 4 layers in between. We cannot expect that the senior leadership will be working on that level. So Gray and I in our consulting talk a lot about the notion of linking pins. How does each layer of that organization take that empowered voice up and down the organization rather than waiting for orders from headquarters, if you will. And that relational connection starts to build the trust through the organization.
I always like to start with the end in mind. The idea of credibility, think of it as the currency of trust. The more consistent you are in showing care, having character, performing your duties with excellence, being communicative at the right thing, being truthful, as often as you do that so it becomes predictable. Imagine if we were starting our car and it was dead half the time, we wouldn't trust it, right? So the fact that you can repeat over and over again the things, the ingredients that make trust trusting gives you those coins of credibility. You can spend that then on making changes, in helping to navigate conflict. You get the authority relationally because people actually trust you to do those things that are correct.
And we're not, maybe 20 years ago, trust was given a little bit more. It's just not there like it used to.
It was implied.
It was more implied. I mean, today, I think leaders have to understand that they may just have to start from a position that there isn't trust and I have to build it, as opposed to like, well, there's a decent amount of trust and I build off of that. If you would have told me 20 years ago that some of my greatest attributes would not come out of success, but out of failure, I would have never believed you. 10 years ago, Harvard Business Review wrote this complex article about this, and 2 years ago they concluded this, that as leaders, people already see the successes you have, but it's more novel, the people you serve and work with, to share with them at times the failures. I think it makes you more approachable. The feel of authenticity and vulnerability is created. I shouldn't say never. I can't remember being taught that. I was taught, like, look at the things I do well, how many plates you can, no, it's actually like, no, look at some of the things that I failed at. And those actually become the things that build trust into people because I'm willing to be vulnerable.
A lot has been written on the topic of trust. And I think what we're learning over and over again is that vulnerability leads to trust. And it seems backwards. It seems like I have to trust this person in order to be vulnerable with them. But as it turns out, if I'm more vulnerable, then they trust me more. And I think in these different things that have been written about trust, it almost always comes down to 2 factors. character and competence. So character, integrity, and competence gets to that, sort of reliability that you talked about, Dave. And if you think about it, if either one of those is missing, and we see leaders that you can say it's a character issue, the integrity is not there, they don't walk the talk. But you see other ones where it's really a competence issue. And people in the organization don't trust them because they don't feel they're competent. So you ultimately sort of have to work individually and in people on your team on the character issue and the competence issue.
It's interesting because we've all grew up hearing the phrase from our parents probably, right? And we've probably used it our fair share. You have to earn trust. And that's actually only partly true. Trust grows when you just give it. Period. And so sometimes we have to just trust. People often say, how do you rebuild trust? And I often say, trust. They could never earn enough of it. Sometimes you just have to give it, period. And that starts the ball rolling of the rebuilding because you showed what? Respect, forgiveness. You let that slight go. You weren't going to be overly focused on the one area of disappointment. Culture was built on organizational, theorists have talked about this for decades, something called the psychological contract. An employer would hire you and you would have a job for life if you showed up. That was called a psychological contract. And now employers and employees are all aiming at each other and pointing at each other saying, I don't trust you because I know you'll lay me off the first chance you get. And the employer saying, well, I don't want to invest in you because I don't know if you're going to stay around. And they both don't, they start with a predisposition towards distrust. And we have to start with a predisposition towards trust. So what we've heard here is character matters, obviously. Competency matters. Connection, right? And showing genuine concern for people, vulnerability. These are all practical things that we as leaders can do. The last thing we could afford to do with the issue of trust is grow cynical about it. There's always ways that we can build trust in society and in our organizations as well.